Okay, and we are live, everyone. Welcome to Masculine Geek number 138. This is the Fireside chat series, and this one in particular is a good one. This is the D&D and literary fantasy talk with special guests Rollo Tomassi and Jeffro Johnson, who is the author of this book, Appendix N. You can see that right there. I think we all have our copies with us. Before we get started, I want to tell a topical anecdote. The gym where I work out at the Morristown Mall, which is it's part of the mall now, there's a good portion of it has taken over old stores that I remember as a child. And one of the stores that it had absorbed was a bookstore called The Bookend. And I mentioned this in one of the Masculine Geek newsletters probably about a month ago. And it's really cool because the section where the Smith machines are and where I was doing my workout was essentially where I used to sit as a kid, 10-year-old boy, and read the D&D modules and the rule books and everything. So it always tickles the shit out of me when I'm working out and I'm remembering this. I'm like, this is cool to be working out where I used to sit as a kid 41 years ago and read D&D modules and books. It's just the coolest thing. Exactly. Lifting and sweating and just walking through memory, lifting through memory. And of course, it's never a proper chat section.
No, without Nick.
If Nick is not here, if Nick isn't here, yes. All right, so everyone, I want to welcome Mr. Jethro Johnson and Mr. Rollo Tomassi to this talk. So, Jeffro, could you explain this a little bit? What is I mean, we know what it is, but for everyone else who does not know, what is Appendix N?
Right. Okay. There's a little section in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide, the 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide, where Gary Gygax laid out his key inspirations for the development of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And the books on there for a little kid that's going to a bookstore in the mall in like 1981 or so would not know half of these authors and would probably have a hard time finding some of them.
Correct.
So this is a little piece of hidden lore, a time capsule tucked away in a very prominent place, and it's a mystery that it's so strange. And so I ended up surveying. I did the first, biggest, most complete survey of the material with a real solid depth of covering both the works and opining on old school D&D and whatever was going to be the most interesting thing. And the journey through those things was it brought forth surprise after surprise, and people are still talking about it. People are still grappling with the discoveries that came out of that. So.
Okay. Now, obviously, you started writing the book later, but when did you actually start going through any of the books? Did you actually start any of the books back when you initially discovered the game, or was that all later in life?
It was, yeah, I'd say the majority of those authors were brand new to me. The tone of the Appendix N book is just chapter after chapter of me saying, why did anybody tell me? Why did anybody tell me that this was so good? This is so much better than everything else. And that's the thing that really drives me crazy is, I mean, there are like Robert E. Howard scholars that sort of talk to each other, but they don't burn through the collective consciousness to get people talking about this stuff. And a real big problem when anybody is reviewing stuff from before 1980, as I completed each chapter, I would just scour the internet looking for any commentary on these books, any reviews, anything. Sometimes I wouldn't find anything, but if I did find something, it would always include somebody saying something to the effect of, well, we know so much better now than what these poor benighted authors of this dark time thought and did. But so we can enjoy some things, but we have to spend half the review talking about why you shouldn't just enjoy it. So I think I was the first author to dispense with the sort of bowing the knee at the altar of modernity and political correctness with each one, and instead just said, focus on all this stuff that I couldn't even imagine you could write. These people did it, and they did it really well.
And many have been stolen from ever since in very poor imitations.
Oh yeah,
it was good. No, you see the DNA of every single major franchise, practically. Comic books, science fiction movies, just literally everything. Built on what these people wrote, and people don't even know they exist.
It's like they were relying on the obscurity of these authors and these books. Like, oh, okay, we can just repackage this.
Yeah. Well, and Gardner Fox actually worked in comics for a while. I mean, a lot of
Golden Age
people take for granted the Flash legacy, directly goes to him. And while he was still alive in the latter part of his years, he'd be at a comic book convention, and
nobody would
all
know.
These guys, lined up to see Adam Hughes and get their, books signed. And there's Gardner Fox, the man who helped laid some of the groundwork way back in the day, the foundation of some things. And, no one but a handful of us even knowing or interested in who he was and what he was doing there. So, which is really sad. Says a lot about the state of a lot of things when you think about it. But anyway, I noticed, Jethro, I haven't finished the book yet because I've got a lot of things to read, some of which I'm being paid to read. But there is definitely a certain enthusiasm to your views, even with things that you don't like. There's just such joy and amazement with some of the things. So that definitely comes across in your writing, which makes reading about these books all the more interesting as far as reading your reviews or critiques. But it also, I think, makes the desire, especially for things that, as if you were coming at it as someone who's never read any of these works, it certainly makes them all the more enticing as well. And that's even with things that you didn't like as well as others.
There's nobody who can read the description of 9 Princes in Amber and not come away immediately wanting to buy the omnibus of the Chronicles of Amber series.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's too appealing. It's too attractive.
Gosh.
Yeah.
That really is the voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my first time.
I'm gonna get you to read book 5, man.
I'll do it. I'll wait until I get to Dallas, and then I'll do it.
James, I've been wanting to meet James for a long time. This is really exciting for me because
cool.
Well, when my book came out, there was some game designer writing about stuff, writing about D&D, and
oh, you met Aaron?
It was James, and I don't know what I said. I don't know if I blogged or commented.
I remember what it was. It's you responded to a Quora answer that I had written on the subject of plot in D&D, and you wrote a response essay, and I wrote a response essay to your response essay.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So it's one of those cases.
Nerds.
Yeah. It was I was really hard on him, but some people you insult them on the internet and they never forgive you, and then some people you become friends after, and that was this one. So
yeah, it's a good test.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Immediately, Jeffro has single-handedly carried my. I was always going to be a game designer, but Jeffro has single-handedly carried my design career because I've been investigating everything that he wrote. I read again the 9 Princes in Amber intro, and maybe I'll read that at some point tonight. But it was so attractive and appealing, and I went into each and every one of these works that I could get my hands on and reasonably keep designing at the time. And being introduced to Vance, being introduced to Zelazny, it's so chock full of fantastical experiences, which is what tabletop games trade in. That is their currency, is new experiences. And these are so beyond the pale, so beyond anything that you get in most of modern gaming, most of WotC gaming, certainly, and most of what you get in literature, most of what you get in TV. It's just a step beyond.
James, I've mentioned second time books before. Have you been there yet?
Not yet.
Okay, when we do the Village by the Sea 2.0 2021, before we head down, I'm going to take you to that bookstore. It's in Rancocas. All these books that are in Appendix N, you will be able to find there.
Damn.
The original paperback printings. All of them. Yeah. And
that's why you told me to bring money. Excellent.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Maybe we'll do an impromptu broadcast from there too. That'd be kind of cool. So yes.
Well, like I mentioned on Twitter, you all of you independently asked me to read you bedtime stories, so I'll be able to.
We did, and Rob wants you to make him breakfast. So there you go.
No, what James says though is it's really a very sad thing, or it's astonishing thing, because when I was a kid, I really struggled to play D&D. I struggled to imagine how to play D&D, and then as an adult, when I started cruising through these books, they're so mind blowing. You know, looking at D&D again after that, I just can't help but look back and say that, you know, my whole life I didn't have an imagination. Like I was literally so stunted in my mind that I'm going to just say, you know, I was like an unimaginative person. And for a person into role-playing games, that's a particularly hurtful thing to conclude.
Right.
Because you just think you're so smart. You just like, you know, but
and
no,
the rug gets pulled out from under you.
It's hard. But the whole generation is like that, though.
Yeah. Rollo, is that how you got your start with D&D?
I'll tell you what's funny is I can remember getting the first boxed set of D&D, and I want to say it's the Holloway version, the one with the big red dragon on it with the
1983.
Archer.
Yeah.
Well, no, it was the 70s. It was 1979. Yeah, that one right there. That was exactly.
Oh, that one. Okay.
Yeah, and then it had like Descent into the Unknown or something. No, it was In Search of the Unknown was the module.
B1, yeah.
And it didn't come with dice. It came with chits because they didn't have the actual like polyhedral dice in it yet. That's how early my experience with D&D was. I'm kind of like you in a sense. I got into it. I had some people, some older kids, because I think I was maybe like 9 or 10. About 10, maybe 11, somewhere around there. And I played with some older kids who were really into the game, or it was the newest thing. And I'm like, what? Couldn't wrap my head around like role playing. I knew what acting was, and I knew what playing a game was, but I didn't know what role playing was. Like everybody says, oh yeah, it's like you know when you go to a psychologist and they make you play a different role. I'm like, what? you know, and it's in my 10-year-old brain. I didn't know what the hell it was all about, but I did love the sword and sorcery stuff back then. I think I saw the Lord of the Rings, the original animated version of it, and of course I was into Star Wars then. I was kind of a like any other kid at that time, and it was a good time to be going through all of that because everything was brand new. And I think the idea that it was kind of like your own sandbox and you could make it into whatever the hell you wanted it to be was a real major appeal. And I didn't realize why it was a major appeal at 10 years old, obviously, but now, later on in life, I certainly I get it, because it allows you to sort of, it's a blank canvas, right? It's like you build and create whatever the hell you want to. Unlike Jeffro, I'm much more imaginative. I've always been an artistic kid. I've always built models. I always if I can play music or write or draw or whatever, I was always doing that, even as early as 7 years old, when I watched Star Wars and started drawing all the X-Wings and the TIE fighters, right? But the appeal, I think, was being able to sort of get into that fantasy realm and sort of just play a character, which I liked, because I was doing the very first bits of acting back then, or I would like to think I was going to be doing something in acting or performing at that time, even as early as 10 or 11 years old. So there was that appeal to it as well. But like you, I would frequent a bookstore. I was born and raised in Southern California, in Pasadena, California, and we had 2 stores there. One of them was called what was it? Well, the first one was Book Village. That was the easiest one, and Book Village was very much like the place you're describing, only they had lead miniatures then, the dungeon dwellers, and that was the appeal for me right there. And then there was an old store. It's no longer there, obviously, but it was right by an arcade, and it was called the Gaming House, and that was like kid heaven in like 1981 or 82 or something like that. And it was right by this arcade called Star Castle, and it was like a real live 80s style arcade, and positioned perfectly next to the Gaming House. And that's where I got my first taste of playing real D&D. And like, of course, it was all the original books from like 79, 78 that we were playing. And it was just coming into like, I guess, like the modules were getting updated, and the modules that you and I that we play together on my, when I'm dungeon mastering, those are the same ones, right? And so I would play there. And then also I had a very liberal gaming education, because I also got into wargaming there too, because they had the very first instances of Warhammer Fantasy Battle back then. And I loved models and miniatures back then. And so that was the appeal of all that. So I kind of split my time between miniature war games and role-playing games. As I got to be a teenager, I started playing more role-playing games. But then, of course, there was the stigma of being kind of a dork. If you play, it's funny to me to see like how nerd / geek culture has gone from being like, you're an incel. Well, we didn't know what an incel was back then, right? You're going to be a perma virgin, right? And so we got the double whammy, because it was, you're going to be a virgin or you're going to go to hell, because that was in the satanic panic years. And everything was like, you're summoning demons. That's the next step, and you got these chick tracts, and you had all that stuff. Cause my mom was very religious at the time. So it was really, it was an interesting education in just sort of social dynamics as well as everything else. But I will say this, when I was reading Jethro's book, the one thing that I did not understand, like I got back into playing D&D when my daughter was about 9 or 10, and I started playing Dungeons and Dragons with her, and she just got it like that, and she just enjoyed it, and she would bring her friends over, and it was weird to me because like here I am, the dungeon master throughout her like summer vacations and stuff, and I'm DMing. Not for boys, but for like 4 little girls, like between the ages of like 9 and 11, and they're just eating it up, and they can't wait for the next thing. And I was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, we've come full circle, right? But one thing that when I started getting back into it, and I went and bought the DM's guide off of eBay. I went and bought the old Player's Handbook, all the stuff that I have in my bookcase right now. I ended up selling that stuff before, and then I had to rebuy it again. So I have those books so I could play like regular, good, old school D&D, because I wasn't familiar with like Pathfinder or any of the newer, like I think it was like 3.5 back then. Yeah,
I never played it.
And I never really could get into it. So I went back to, I know how to do this. So that's what I played. And then I did what Jeffro said, is like, I started reading it from like an adult perspective, and I started looking at the intent of the game. And I go, damn, man, this is like, Gygax was thorough. He was so like comprehensive and so thorough. And I was reading all this stuff, and I'm like, of course, I didn't get it when I was 10 years old reading it for the first time, just like me. And I was just like, I was blown away at just the intricacy, the complexity, and how thorough he was about this. But one thing after reading your book, Jethro, was I didn't realize the magic system was based on Vance. And it was like you memorize spells and you forget the spells. And you want to talk about one of the greatest crimes in the history of role-playing games, is that's where that came from. That's what has been sort of the standard understanding of like you learn a spell and you shoot it off kind of thing. And it has been from every role-playing game. It has been every, like even like World of Warcraft, that kind of stuff. It's been through that. So the point where it's like you memorize it and you lose it kind of thing. I didn't realize that wasn't like that. There were alternatives to that. That there could have been like another system for magic, and I didn't even realize, because that seemed to me like the most intuitive way.
Yeah.
And then you read those books when you don't know they exist, and you go read those Jack Vance stories. It's like it's bizarre. It's like, how can this thing like that influenced everything that came after it, and it's like, whoa, wait, it makes sense, and it's a whole world, and it's awesome. It's like Gygax, he even writes in the Dungeon Master's Guide, like if people had questions about how magic worked in AD&D, he's like, look, just read Eyes of the Overworld, like it's like literally just not even, that's not even hidden in the back. He just comes right out and says it, and
it's in the description for what happens if a thief miscasts his scrolls, which we discovered arguing with somebody who was telling us that it wasn't Vancian.
Yeah, who was the guy that wrote the Grey Mouser and Fafford?
Fritz Lieber.
Fritz Lieber.
Yeah. Like that right there, I was like, I know that they had Lankmar adventures and stuff like that, but I didn't realize just how significant that was to like sort of the mechanics of of the game. And that's what's interesting to me is taking sort of the fiction of like what's in Appendix N, taking that fiction and using that as like sort of points of reference for game rules, because and we've gotten into this sort of back and forth as well, like the difference between like say a war game versus a role-playing game. And it's one thing to have sort of the tactical stuff down, but it's another thing to sort of take into consideration, like a thief casting a spell with a scroll, that kind of stuff. There's no like historical war game, like, parallel to that.
Yeah, I always wondered if that's where he got, Gygax got his idea for bards from Fafford. He was a singing, he's a singing skald. Yeah,
Barbarian skald, and then the Grey Mouser was kind of the prototypical
thief,
rogue.
Yeah.
And speaking of the scroll, the name of the story escapes me, but it's when the Grey Mouser and Fafford were both sent by Ningobel to Cornwall, or it might have been Shielba. If you guys have read these, you know who I'm talking about. One of them gave the Grey Mouser a spell scroll, and a big part of the plot is he could only use this once. And again, this was written before this stuff. What is like the 1940s or so that Fritz Lieber wrote these, but it really, going back and reading through these, or I shouldn't say going back, but reading through these now, you see, okay, well, this is where that came from, or this might have been one of the things that inspired that, because it really, there's so much, and I'm going through, and it's fresh in my mind because I'm going through all of Fritz Lieber's Fafford and the Grey Mouser stuff now. But as I'm going through each one of these stories, elements keep popping up that just scream, this was the inspiration for, or might have been a factor influencing these elements in the game, and they are just phenomenal stories. Somebody else mentioned earlier, we were talking how a lot of the stuff that's coming out now seems so unimaginative, derivative, copy and paste. Yeah, it's contrived. It's perfect.
Yeah,
there's
forced almost.
Formulaic. And I can't remember who I was talking to about it, but it's in a lot of ways, it's kind of like music. I suspect that the publishers are selectively picking things that they think will be safe bets, which encourages more people to just follow a formula than be imaginative. And I can't help but wonder if that's why some of this is happening in fiction as well, because I've read some more recent stuff, and I'm not going to pick on any particular authors, but it does seem formulaic, almost predictable, to the point where there's no suspense. And I catch myself thinking, well, I know what's going to happen. And sure enough, it's what happens. Right. Whereas with a lot of these older stories, again, and reading through the Fafford and the Grey Mouser stuff now, I have no idea half the time where it's going. And that's fun.
Yeah.
Because I have to keep reading because I want to know what happens next. And it has not disappointed yet.
That's one of the great things about the Appendix in literature compared to today is it's very short story oriented. There's authors that they specialized in that, or the Dying Earth is a collection of stories. The Fawford stories, they're all short stories, and Frederick Brown. But like when you read all of these, like you get like a bazillion different stories, and when you're running a game and a situation comes up, there's always some story that fits it. When your imagination is dominated by movies, your sort of your mental vocabulary gets flattened.
Yes.
And the sort of the TV tropes sort of mindset sort of takes over. But like in these stories, like the number of voices, but you see, there was no gatekeepers yet the way we have today, and all of these people they were they were much more independent, and the magazines were not like fake. So you had like this instead of like 5 people getting selected to be the representatives of the field, you had really more like, that was one of the shocking things. It's like, man, the second and third string was really good. Today, like it's like the big names, and then there's like a bunch of nobodies. But back then, it's like the bench was so deep. And so as you get in there, everyone having their own spin and their own take, their own style, their own tone, and representing even different portions of the country. Like Lovecraft is a very different voice than Howard in Texas.
Yeah.
These people as well, they were all different from each other, and they were literate. They had read all the same works of fiction that a lot of us have even forgotten. That they knew who Rollo was, right? They knew who Roland was, and so on. And so the side effect of this, it's just this huge energy there. You can, as you read the stories, you get exposed to a whole lot of things that are applied to a whole lot more things, and it actually builds up your imagination.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I like the, as I was saying before, I like the early incarnations of Dungeons and Dragons, like the AD&D modules. Or I know you hate modules, but I really liked them.
I love them,
But
I'm going to try not to tell you guys that you're playing D&D wrong.
Yeah, we are. I know. I can't use Photoshop miniatures. I got it. I have a war game background. What can I say? No, I think that the appeal to that was this open sandbox, kind of, for lack of a better term, like this open sandbox. It was, here's the rules, make it your game. And it's your world, make it your world. It's your characters, make it your characters. And I mean, here's the outlines, follow these rules. But I like the idea that, like what you were saying before, is like, even if you didn't have a prepared like dungeon ready to go, you could just roll and on any number of lists and just create one as you go, kind of thing. And I think that was a beauty of it, because that was just how comprehensive Gygax was back then. And you don't appreciate it when you're 10, but you do when you're 50. And you'll understand something about like game design, and you realize just how ahead of his time that Gygax really was about that kind of stuff.
It works so well.
Yeah.
The tables, just the amount of tables, the variety, and how well thought out, how well planned they were in the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide is just mind-blowing. I was reading it a second time, trying to get ready for our game, coming back from Wisconsin in July, and just spent almost the entire flight just looking through and browsing the tables. And I know something that Jeffro has written about, commented on, blogged about, is that the timekeeping in the games and some of the longer term stuff. And what really amazed me that I was not even aware of before, because when we started playing, we were kids, we played 2E, and we were just pulling stuff out of our ass, making shit up as we went along, very loosely following the guide. So I didn't even read it that carefully back then. And then none of the stuff is in 5e. But going through, they had an entire section on character lifespan and determining how old your PC would live to be and how old they were at the time of the start of the game, and keeping track of these things so that if by some chance you managed to die a natural death instead of being killed by some trap or monster or something, you would know how long that would be. And there were tables for determining all this stuff. It's just,
There's tables for insanity.
Yeah. For alcohol.
Many different like personality disorders. Roll a d20 and that's what you got.
Yeah, for drinking too, for being drunk.
There are tables for what sort of street woman.
Yeah.
Rollo, do you remember the tweet where some bitch was complaining about, here's why we shouldn't use the term mistress?
Yeah.
And we should
absolutely use the term mistress.
I'm trying to find it right now. I got it sitting in here. I was just looking at the insanity tables. And I'm like, this guy picked out like he had to have known like at least 20 different like ways you could be nuts.
Oh yeah, and then there's the monster tables,
and then apply a rule to that. So if you had megalomania, that's your you roll these things.
TJ, how did you get started with D&D?
With you when we did the Gettysburg meetup, and I had never played D&D before. So it was interesting because, and it's germane to the discussion, is that you did not strike me as a D&D guy, because I had this perception of like, no, seriously, it's the kids that played D&D were the stereotypical dweebs, dorks, the basement dwellers, and all that other kind of stuff.
The guys with the Black Sabbath T-shirts that play D&D.
Yes, that was me.
There were two extremes. There was the quote unquote metalheads, and then you had the dorks and the dweebs. There's no gray period in the 80s.
Right. And so, and you didn't tell me in advance that we were going to play D&D. You had just brought all this stuff, and so we were playing. And then it was funny because I remember Aaron Clary was doing a video years ago where he was giving an analogy from D&D, and he mentioned he was a player, and I was like, wow, he does not strike me as the type of guy that I grew up knowing who played D&D.
Right.
They tended to be more socially. They were
inept.
We all know kind of like what that was like. So it was interesting playing it, and I'm actually also not used to playing games that are more loose in terms of there's a lot of things that are not fixed, meaning D&D has certain rules, but most games have very specific rules about.
These are more like guidelines.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's
everything is codified, but it's still left to a certain interpretation by both the players and the dungeon master.
Right, and the
DM. Plus, there's places where they're silent, where you could like when you're dealing with something that's not covered in the rules at all, then it just works how you think it works.
Yeah, and what's interesting, and maybe it's out there, I don't know, but from what I understand, there are no equivalents of this type of game for other types of aesthetics, meaning like a World War II version. Like you're doing like some sort of, you're a squad, or you're doing a Band of Brothers version or something like that, and then you can just convert everything, keep the core elements of the game, or maybe you do it for like you can do it for any kind of. You essentially can take the core concept of the game and apply whatever motif that you want. This one is fantasy and a lot of like high fantasy stuff, but somebody could do that. But I guess those type of guys would just play war game, like Peter Cushing or something like that.
Well, there's always GURPS, right? A generic universal role playing system.
Yeah, like the D20 systems. Yeah.
I hate to be that guy, but the wargaming is exactly what you just said. Everything that we do, this is mainly survived within role playing, D&D particular. But in the 19th century, when wargaming was developed, There was really, really complicated rules to do it, and they had a problem where they couldn't get enough people to either run the game or to care about the rules of the game enough to play it. And so what happened then was that these Prussian military guys who knew how war really worked, they would just make rulings to make sure everything worked out. People could describe their military strategies and stuff to these people, describe what they were going to do. And then if the rules didn't cover it, or if the rules conflicted with what they knew about how war actually worked, they would just make it work. So I've all my encounters with war gamers today, pretty like the G&T games and the World War II games and the historical stuff. Like I have not met anybody in those circles that are familiar with the history of the kind of war gamers who created D&D in the first place and the kind of war games that they did.
Yeah.
So it's strange that wargaming has lost this. It appears to.
Yeah.
Did you
Definitely.
guys ever use the battle system, the war game D&D rules, the box set?
No, but I remember it. I remember the miniatures. I mean, there was a time where, and I probably was under 3.5 or something like that, where they came out with a lot of those plastic, like pre-painted models, which were very, they were meant to compete with like Hero Clicks or something like that. I think is really what they were trying to get. Wizards had owned it by then, and they were trying to muscle in on that territory. But I get what you're saying, Jeffro. It's
I swear by chainmail, by the way.
Yeah.
It's so good. It works way better than you would think it would. It looks terrible. It looks like just an awful rule set. But for what it does, it's really a beautiful piece of work. And of course, once you play it, you'll know where all the D&D rules come from, for dealing combat, why they are the way they are.
Yeah, there was a time in from like the early 80s all the way up until really mid 2000s or like 2010, I think, or somewhere, maybe actually 2013. Warhammer Fantasy Battle was very reminiscent of historical like wargaming. Like it's what was it called? Our ranks and flanks, right? I mean, it was, you had to wheel everything was in a perfect kind of ranking kind of thing, and it was always you had to form your divisions up, and it was very reminiscent of old school historical wargaming. And then at some point, I think it was 2014, 2015, they decided that they're going to just toss all that out the window, and they were going to do like a skirmish style fantasy game, which is now Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And it took off, and I understand why, but it took off because it's very video game easy to understand as far as that goes. Like it's much, you don't have to worry about like ranks and flanks, or like you hit it from this side, you hit it from that side kind of thing.
I just love when you the scale of like you're moving 10 figures which represent 100 men, and they're in 2 ranks, and now they've moved up here, and the cavalry is coming, and then the cavalry rolls a dice, and whoa, and that hit, you take a figure off the board, and like that's 10 dudes that just died just now. It's like it's just that when you've played D&D your whole life, and then suddenly you're working at that scale, it's like, man, we could do anything, man. We can play any kind. There's no battle we can't run now.
Yeah.
Well, hypothetically, or maybe not hypothetically, because I'm sure this has happened, what would you recommend to somebody who is running an AD&D campaign, and most of it involves just the PCs and maybe a few henchmen, but you want to involve them in larger scale battles? If you are going to have something like this happen, would you recommend going and reading the chainmail stuff, or is there something else that you recommend for running these sort of, like, maybe you throw them into it, or maybe they are required to gather a group and do this, whatever the reason? If you have a small party and suddenly they're involved in a battle with hundreds of people per side, what would you recommend for a rule set for that would work with the AD&D?
Yeah, D&D will create these situations all the time if you're using those wilderness encounter tables, because it puts 100 or 200 gnolls out there on in the world, or 200 goblins, or 60 cavemen. It just happens all the time. And if you're afraid of mass combat because you're not comfortable running it, then your story kicks into gears. You're like, oh well, how can I make a situation where they can get out of this fight? But if as these things get placed there, you get multiple things stacking up in the wilderness surrounding your dungeon, and they all have an interest in each other. Week to week, you're like, well, if there's 200 gnolls here, what are they going to do about this stuff that's over there? And and the players, if they go over there, stuff happens. My rules for that, and I ended up running them pretty hard. I use these to run kind of smallish battles with 60 cavemen and 100 frogmen, and then the PCs and some mushroom dudes. Another time it was 100 goblins on infantry that are attacked by a very large group of cavalry, the dervishes from the monster manual. And then finally, the most epic battle of all was Elric with 100 cavalry facing off an army of cave bears, cavemen, and dinosaurs with a druid, a third level druid. Is
that like the Isle of Dread?
So all of those battles, which I've run in the past like 8 months, I use just the AD&D rules because when you look at the game, it's really just chainmail. With none of the terrain and none of the facing and none of the details that you could use to make an actual miniatures game. It's just the guts, the soul of chainmail ripped out of it and then elaborated on. And because the game has been built from pieces of chainmail ideas are 100% compatible with it. Furthermore, all that stuff that in your player's manual where you've got weapon versus AC and weapon length and weapon speed, all of that stuff. Particularly those weapon versus AC and then the weapon length. When you're conducting a big charge, that stuff is gold. Like most people who stay at the PC scale look at it and they go like, why would I ever use that? That's really dumb. And they don't
understand.
But like when you're doing a cavalry charge, woo, man, you want to know every single bit of that, and it's worth the time. You're going to roll 10 d20s to do this cavalry charge. Man, it's worth taking another 5 seconds and getting the bonuses just right. Looking in the odd corners of the DMG and so forth. But yes, AD&D combat is a mass combat system itself. It only lacks a couple of ideas. You need to know how to handle terrain. You need to know how to handle facing changes. Here's how you know that AD&D combat is chainmail. There's that rule where if you run away, the other side gets free attacks.
With the opportunity attack. Yeah.
That, if you look at chainmail rules, if you want to do an about face with your unit of infantry, it takes a turn to turn around. So if you're turning around, you're not going to be swinging your swords at the guys that are getting those free attacks. It's that the rule makes sense in chainmail, and it just got applied in the game. So the next idea you need to scale up AD&D combat. One figure represents 10 men, or one figure represents 20 men. If you can do multiplication and division, that's that. And the little game Swords and Spells. This is something that I had success with. Rolling to hit for 20 dudes and then rolling damage for 20 dudes and then checking the hit points of 20 dudes. That's not going to work. You could try to make that work, but it's just not sustainable.
So would you just do like one roll for this 10 versus the average of this 10?
The way I do it is that Swords and Spells said, which was Gary Gygax, was his system to integrate chainmail with D&D in the original D&D era. It's really fascinating to look at. All you have to do to get something that's very playable is to say that everybody in this group, this 100 men, they all have their average hit points. And then every weapon hit that you do, that's going to do average damage. Boom, that you just cut out all that die rolling. So once you figured out your to hit rolls and like, oh, there's 10 guys facing up this group of men, I could tell by the facing, like these many guys are going to get the shot. So you figure out the to hit rolls. You roll 20 D10s or D20s, and you can just see right there, how many hits did I get? Okay, I got that many hits. So then I know that group of men took that many hits. You just multiply that times the average damage. Subtract that from the average hit points, or divide the average hit points by that. You know how many figures just died in that stack. So I probably could have explained that a little bit better, but like the excitement, what I want to get across is that when you're playing this stuff out, it works really fast. It uses, if you've played a lot of AD&D already, you already know how to do all of this. It's just a couple of little ideas, and when you're not afraid to scale up the game, and you know, the great thing about this is once you're playing this way, it's easy to to transfer back and forth between PC scale, say assassins that are going to assassinate the enemy leaders, somehow. It's easy to translate back and forth between the spells and the special character abilities and the chaos of the whole battle. And it plays fast enough that you know that it's just fun. It's the same stuff you do in the dungeon. It's just a lot more of it.
Just on a logarithmic scale.
That's why in 4th edition they had the whole concept of the minion. You could have like 20 or 30 goblins attacking the party, and it seems overwhelming, but they only had 1 hit point, so you got a sense of like the characters just mowing down the enemies if the dice rolls are in your favor.
I can remember being like 10 or 12 years old and reading the monster manual, and then you look at like the entries for like orcs or goblins, and you're like, oh yeah, they'll be 60 to 600.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How the PC is supposed to take care of that?
Exactly.
Henchmen.
Drew, if you want a good series to read that deals with like small groups of adventures, then dealing with large battles and armies, read Glenn Cook's series, The Black Company.
The Black Company. I will check that out. That's actually one of my next questions for Jeffro is going to be related to that. I went through the book, and I haven't read. I'm about maybe a third of the way in, but I actually made a shopping list out of the chapters in the book, and have just been going and trying to find order everything that I don't already own. And one of the things I was going to ask and related to that, and make sure write it down so I don't forget it, The Black Company, was I'm going to read all of these. My plan is to read all the ones I haven't read yet and then reread the ones that I have. But I was also wondering if there are other books that are like these. Like, what are the first maybe 2 or 3 that come to mind that you would recommend that if Gygax had added any more, what other contenders might there have been for the list that you would recommend people read for inspiration for coming up with creative worlds or scenarios for running games?
Okay. Gosh. All right. Yeah. Man, ooh, that's a thorny question. Like the appendix and books, like that's one of the things that strikes me again and again as I keep digging in there is how often that there's a mass combat wargamer scenario in those stories that you kind of lose later. So like, you know, when Conan, when in A Witch Shall Be Born, you know, Conan, like he gets crucified and he has to like go collect an army in order to come back and go fight these guys that had taken over the city. Jack Vance, the Dragon Masters, that one is it's such a war game. It's such a war game. It's you know, they're breeding dragons to fight each other. They have like armies of dragons, and then these guys, these from outer space, land, and they're attacking them with these high-tech weapons, and they've bred humans into being monsters for their armies to attack the humans with. Like the the stories, like, I was reading Ivanhoe this week. Like I want to like be able to say, like,
mention that.
go read Ivanhoe. But like, man, like when we play D&D, you just gotta. The more I read stuff outside of the list, the more like it strikes me that like D&D really is its own thing in a real deep way. Like it's because you think about this world where there's like monsters wandering around everywhere. There's dungeons with ancient treasures in them, and you go in and you just get it, and then you build a castle, and you raise an army, and you're fighting some other guy it's just this total. It's the world of like Black Sabbath's, Paranoid, Iron Man and War Pigs, just nonstop. And like I don't read as much stuff out of the list where I go like, man, that's it. Like it's Appendix N, like it's a really specific set of stuff. Like people do want to put in. I mean, this is what everybody else wants to say. Like they want to talk about C.L. Moore and Clark Ashton Smith and but like, like, do you like Gygax liked stuff that had big, insane battles in it? Like he just did. And weird ones like that Michael Moorcock book where these knights on flamingos are flying in to battle all this other crazy stuff. It's and then it's also like the stuff in there, like a third of Appendix N is really, it's science fantasy.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
So it's, which is not even an acknowledged genre anymore. It doesn't even exist as a genre. So it's like, yeah, it's that time period from about 1900 to 1980. It's unique. You'll be a better person if you read stuff like Ivanhoe, but like, but like there's chivalry just doesn't exist in most AD&D shows. It doesn't. Knights don't act like knights in AD&D for some reason. They act like Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Yeah, right.
Rogues.
Yeah,
and I mean, if you read it, they're really just mercenary criminals.
They're dicks. James, real fast.
The stories are great.
Competent Man, thank you for the $5 super chat. James, go ahead. You're up.
Yes, wasn't there a monster / item in one of the manuals / tables that cost 0 points? I remember a joke cartoon showing a player taking 1 million of them.
Is that true? It sounds like something like Phil Folio. Phil Folio would have created in the back of the Dragon magazine.
Yeah.
Or maybe Murphy's Rules.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. I don't know. I don't remember that. Good question.
I was curious, Jethro. Back when I first started playing in the late 70s, by the time we get around to the early 80s and D&D is starting to pick up in popularity and become a little bit more widespread and universally known within popular culture circles. Obviously, a lot of people came to the game because they had read The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, and that's what they were wanting to do, and that's what they thought D&D was. And I remember, and it may have been something that was unique to the area in which I live, that normally they were very quickly corrected, and the literary triumvirate that usually got mentioned as no, this is what D&D is, was some combination of Howard, Lieber, and Moorcock.
Yep.
Now, there would be times, especially players that were magic users or DMs that usually ran campaigns almost exclusively in the Greyhawk setting, Vance would be in that list. Also, Burroughs would get put in that list, and I would think justifiably so on any of those 5. But
Absolutely.
if you were backed into a corner and had to name the literary triumvirate on which AD&D is based, on which is the primary influences on Gygax and his building of that world, what 3 would you pick? If you could, and I know that's tough because there's a lot more than just 3 major influences, but
Yeah. Liber is like number 1 for me, because you could play AD&D, and if you go read Liber after you do that, you're going to be like, hey, that's what we were doing. I think that's the closest match. Is it? Yeah, I want to say. That's just such a tough one. All right, but yeah, Vance, you can't. Oh yeah, so the 2 biggest ones are those 2, and then I would say I'm going to say the cosmology piece is really important, and for that, I'm going to skip over Moorcock and go to Paul Anderson, because if you like, because a lot of people struggle with Keep on the Borderlands and basic D&D, and they're like, how does this even make any sense? There's this group of caves over here, and the kingdom of the realm can't afford to send an army to go deal with this. Why are players going back and forth between this keep and these caves of chaos? This doesn't make sense. And I think like 3 Hearts and 3 Lions, if you read that, it provides a framework for understanding why that makes sense in a way that no other fantasy book does. And so that's my 3.
Okay.
Yo, what's up, John?
Hey,
the champ is here! The champ is here!
Get off your phone.
I just want to show you.
He's buying Dot.
It was all you should.
Right. I just want to show you where I'm at.
You son of a bitch.
Man.
Wow. Where's that at, roughly?
Okinawa.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. Ishigaki
Nice.
Island. Yeah. Rollo sent me the link, just said come through. I just landed.
Absolutely.
John's on Oriental adventures right now.
Right.
Right.
My life is an Oriental adventure.
When you could say Oriental.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. Hey, is James back? James, are you on? Yeah, there you are. James, here it is. Appendix C. Harlot encounters can be with brazen strumpets or haughty courtesans, thus making it difficult for the party to distinguish each encounter for what it is. In fact, the encounter could be with a dancer only prostituting herself as it pleases her, an elderly madam, or even a pimp. So here's what you can meet, by the way, and you got this is a D100 for this. You can have a slovenly troll. There you go. I've never even, like, you want to know vocabulary words? Here you go. A brazen strumpet, a cheap trollop.
Cheap trollop. Twitter, what?
Just a typical streetwalker. You could be a saucy tart, a wanton wench, expensive doxy. So now we're moving up in the socioeconomic hierarchy here. A haughty courtesan, an aged madam. Aaron Clary, if you're listening.
Lady, man.
You can have a wealthy procuress, a sly pimp, or a rich panderer.
Sly pimp.
Those are your choices.
Didn't Saucy Tart open for you
Saucy
back
Tart,
in your 80s
yes.
metal days?
Yes,
in LA?
with crazy licks.
Yeah.
Oh shit, that's fun. I forgot about that table. There's so much
No.
good stuff. So much
Oh
good
my
stuff going back
goodness.
and rereading the
I
DM's
read a whole
guide.
campaign off that table,
You're
man.
10 years old.
I didn't
Mom,
need
what's
anything
that?
else.
Saucy
Every time
tart.
your buddy insists, that he bring his girl to the table, you have him roll on that chart and say,
Exactly. You're the saucy. You're the
You're the
aged
saucy
madam. Saucy tart or the aged madam.
Oh my gosh.
If you look at those, they and compare them to the level titles for fighters and magic users and so forth. This table implies that there is an actual harlot class.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Maybe if James, if Amos's gnome burglar dies, that could be his alternate.
It could be a saucy tart.
Yeah,
He
could have been.
could be saucy tart.
ST.
You know,
Good old ST.
we were talking earlier about the
Oh my
complexity
God.
of
So-
the- oh, I'm sorry, Vince. Go on ahead if you want. No,
yeah,
it's
you're
your show.
just interrupting.
Sorry.
Jesus.
I was
Christ. No,
actually-
it's cool. We'll
Yeah, go ahead.
we'll come back. We'll come back. I just want to say, John, how did you've played Dungeons and Dragons before, right?
Yeah, when I was a kid, definitely.
Okay. How did you get your?
What
How did
version
you?
did you play?
That was my next question. How did you get started? And what version?
My Cuban nannies had some sons that would be playing it, and then I would just play with them. But I had like pre-rolled characters. I played as a thief for a little bit.
Not the
But-
saucy tart.
Not the saucy tart. That's our favorite South Dakotan.
I wouldn't say favorite now. Come on, that's just pushing the realms of absurdity.
Oh well, poor Aaron. He's just confused.
In more ways than one.
Primarily sexually.
We all knew that.
But no, yeah, I haven't really played much. I was just popping in to say what's up. I'm getting ready to go to the beach here, but Rollo sent me the link, so I just want to say what's up to everybody. Just check in.
Good.
Have
good
fun.
That looks like
Yeah.
a good time.
Have fun with your saucy tart.
That's right. You do have
I
a
am.
saucy tart
Your
with it.
sliced strumpet, whatever she is.
She's over there.
You assume there's only going to be one of them.
Yes, for now.
I didn't know you were on vacation.
I just touched down today. Yeah, no, I had to do it. I've been live streaming every day, literally since July 1st. So I burned out. I was like, okay, I'm not booking a flight. Let's peace out.
Well, good
Nice.
seeing you again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll let you guys go, but I just popped in because Rollo sent the link. But you guys have fun.
Good to see you, brother.
On the subject of running games, and again with the timekeeping, I gotta ask what Jeffro would recommend as far as just the simplest way to keep track of the passage of time when running an AD&D game. Because I've got some ideas, I'm working on some stuff, but if there's a better, faster, simpler way to track everything, especially something to make it easy to know, when torches run out, when it's time to refill the lamps, easy way to keep track of spell duration. Because anything that would simplify it would be beneficial.
Yeah, I think John Mollison at he's got a tabletop wargaming channel, The Joy of Wargaming. I think he recommended that for torches, you just set a timer, and every time the timer goes off, they mark off another torch.
That's a good idea.
I have, like tracking the turns. Like there's a rule of where you need to rest every hour, basically every six turns, or there's also the unit you need to check for wandering monsters about usually every 6 turns as well. And so when you're looking at the map, like I'll be measuring out, okay, how far what's their movement rate? Okay, how many inches is that? Okay, so if they went this far, that'll be an hour. I must use really big distances in my mapped areas. But I'll be able to measure that out. I'll be able to be like, okay, so they want to go from point A to point B. That's going to be 3 torches and 3 wandering monster checks, and I just do the math and roll. So obviously, the other answer is that if you leave the dungeon and go into the wilderness, you start playing like it takes about 5 minutes to roll out everything that happens in a whole day, and so in a 4-hour game session, you'll travel 10 hexes and have like several random encounters. That doesn't have anything like the kind of bookkeeping that dungeon crawling requires. It opens up to just the bigger scope where you just I don't know, you just march off into the future. So that was something when I like back in the 80s when the expert set came out and it was like, now you can do wilderness adventures. To me, I always in my mind that was always like, that's expert level play there, man. Like I'm not going to be ready for that for like probably years, maybe decades, So for me, every time I run wilderness adventures, I feel like, yeah, I've mastered this game now.
Nice. Jeffro, do you have? I'm assuming you have a group of friends that you game around the table on a regular basis.
Lately, it has been, well, obviously for reasons which we all know, it's been virtual for the past year and a half. Which
Gotcha.
turned out I'm very much a Luddite. Minimize technology as much as possible, particularly when it's a social thing. But this last year has been a very different thing for me to run games with people. And the plus side of it, which I'm loath to say anything nice about what technology can do when you have all your freedom stripped away. But by running a game and putting it out there on Twitter and just saying, hey, I'm doing this D&D thing, and just opening up whoever shows up, that allows you to simulate something that wargaming groups in the early 70s could take for granted, which was a very large pool of players that came and go as they wished. That's been a real key. Having that density of players and the variety of players has been a real huge help in unpacking what AD&D was intended to be in the first place.
Gotcha.
Let me ask you this: why is it? How come? I think I know the answer, but how come you don't like modules so much now? And does it apply to the early ones, or is it like just all modules?
Okay, so I'm the person that like you get. I've always loved the old games. The older the game, the better it is. The weirder they are, and the harder they are to understand. So when you pick up Classic Traveler, when you pick up first edition Gamma World, when you pick up first edition Tunnels and Trolls, and original D&D and AD&D, the assumption in all of those rule sets is, well, they were made at a time when modules didn't exist yet, and they were all made with the assumption that the referee was going to create an original, in Guy Jackson's term, a milieu. And the games, to me, and to kid me, to 12-year-old, 14-year-old Jeffro, looking at this stuff, like, how would you do that? This is like an impossible task. And I know from looking at Metamorphosis Alpha by James Ward, he published that. It was the first science fiction role-playing game, and he said, like, yeah, he made this gigantic starship called the Warden, and every level was like tremendous. It was miles long, and so he made up this giant starship with the Warden. And in the rules, he gave you a couple of levels of the Warden as examples. But the intent of the game was like, yeah, you're going to totally throw this together. You're going to do this. And now in the magazine articles for that one, people would come up to him at cons and be like, how did you do that? Like, so like, I know I'm not the only one that was like at a loss for like, how do you do this stuff? And once I did it, like, I always felt bad that I couldn't do it because the original games assume that a real dungeon master or a real referee would just be able to create a whole universe. And like, I mean, it might take you a few weeks. It might take you like 3 weeks or something, but like you should be able to do this. And like, I never met anybody. Oh, here's the other problem. When I ran modules like B2 and even a really good one like Dwemer Mount by James Malazewski and Alexander McChrist and Altark, those guys. Before I'd done it, I was afraid to create a world. I didn't understand that I was afraid to create a world, but like I wasn't sure how everything was going to work. And I would study the modules. I would get a module and I'd read the module cover to cover. And then my prep before a session, I'd be like, oh man, what if the players go over here? Well, I better read all about over there. And then the players wouldn't go over there, or they'd go somewhere else that I hadn't read. And then I'd be like paging through the module in the game and like skimming it. And of course, every time I would skim this stuff, I would always get something major wrong about it. And then next session, I'd be like, okay, well, I got to fix what I did with this module when I was like, struggling to get it. That's a lot of stress. This thing that was supposed to make this problem easier actually adds problems that people don't really talk about. So when I ran AD&D last year, which that was, to me, that was I've always liked simpler games because I'm humble, I'm modest, I'm afraid. But once I'd climbed rocks and stuff, come back to a hard RPG is be like, no, let's just see what's in there, And so when I did it, I wanted to see what is the game that Gygax really put in there. And everything in it is talking about, okay, when you develop a campaign, here's how you build a campaign. When you create your milieu, keep this in mind. You can do this, but you can't do this, but definitely think about this. The whole book is saturated in this assumption that you're going to create an original campaign. There's allowances in there for using other products and things, but no, the weight of it, the weight of the advice is very much like that. The culture of D&D was referees, independent referees who created all of this stuff. And is it that hard? No, well, it turns out the really, 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 really fun part of D&D is not the well-designed adventure or the well-designed module. It's, when you get a large number of really creative people who are playing your game with total autonomy. They can go anywhere. They can do anything. They're always going to be able to go outside of the scope of your prep. That's part of the fun of the game. They'll do it just to throw you off your game and take advantage of you. But what happens when you get these people engaging with your original, all original world? Like every time, I'll see stuff in later modules. And it was like the other day, it was the one from Fiend Folio, the cover of Fiend Folio. There's that GIF on the front of it.
Why do you hate the Gith Zeri and the Gith Yankee?
I was excited about them because I was like, I read it now, and I'm like, when I read that, I'm like, oh look, the guys who created the Gith Yankee were using Gygax's Monster Manual as a template for how to make this stuff, and I see war game armies and war game targets and war game battles between Gith Yankee and Mind Flayers going on, and this is going to be like, man, that sounds like an awesome campaign to me. But like when I threw it out there to the internet, saying, hey, what would you guys do with the Gith Yankee? TSR already has products that describe who they are and what they want and what they're doing, and what they're like and what kind of spaceships they ride in and stuff like that. And like. Every time I take something that TSR continued on with or Wizards has taken and done to, people don't use their imaginations or the rules, either one, to come up with like, what is this thing we're going to play with? What is this thing we can do? Like we could like do anything with this. Once the brand has gotten its hooks into this, the imagining seems, in my opinion, it stops. And in some places it even becomes like a limit to what you can do. People that won't play the rules because D&D, why would you ever have to play the rules? It's creative to make up your own rules. Okay, fair enough. But those people, if they're dealing with a branded property, they can't depart from the branded property. They will. So to me, that's just totally backwards. You should use the rules to help create a coherent campaign world, so that everything's consistent and so that players can make intelligent decisions about their strategies. Everything else, you should leave it open for those creative players to help you build it out and build this world. 10 people being creative in an open campaign, in a wide open original milieu, will always be way better than any product that's ever been created. And to me, the tagline for TSR, it was always, back in the day, it was products of your imagination. Okay, that got lost at some point.
Yeah.
I take a hard line and say, don't do any modules. Go create. This stuff isn't that hard. You can play for 4 hours on one random encounter. Okay, it's not as hard as you're making it out to be. So like, and when you get 3 random wilderness encounters and you make up a session out of that, your imaginations create a world. It's there's actually a term for it. It's called apophenia. It's where whenever you're given a few hints or a few pieces or a few events, that they could be totally random, but when you're presented with it, your brain creates a story that explains why all those things are the way they are. And when you got 10 people who are playing together, their imaginations start firing off of each other to explain this stuff. And it's in the introduction to the Dungeon Master's Guide, Gary Gygax talks about this process, and he says it produces a superior alloy, and it does. I wouldn't take a hard line against modules, except to make a point that this type of play is so much better, and the game was designed to work just fine without those things. Modules historically, or especially supplements in general, they solve a problem of keeping an RPG company in business. They don't solve the actual problems that hobbyist gamers have at the table.
Well, I liked the early modules. Like I liked the Slavers Stockade stuff, and I liked the 1 through 4. The earliest ones I thought were really good. Like Against the Giants were really good because I got the feeling that they were a little bit more genuine, because they, like, a lot of them were created by Gygax himself. I mean, like Tomb of Horrors was
Frank
basically
Menzer.
okay, you got to 14th level, it's time for you to die.
Yeah, right. Holy
that's
shit.
how you would put them down, kind of thing. And I get that, but I think that, of course, the modules were sort of a product to be bought. I mean, they had to keep the business side of things coming up, but I also think it was a way to get people into the games, especially in the tournaments side of things.
Exactly.
I hear what you're saying. I feel you, because later on, when D&D got like very commercialized, and if you have the Art of AD or the Art of D&D book, or what's the history of D&D, it's a big thick like coffee table book.
Yeah, that red book. Yep.
And it goes through the history of it. It's right about that time, like in 84, 85, something like that, and things got like a lot more slick. Like Larry Elmore was doing art for them, and Parkinson was like a regular dude. Yeah, that's the one I have. And it's right about that time that they changed the logo up, and then it wasn't so, it got so much more polished than it was, and I think it kind of lost the appeal for me, as far as, like, I remember I was telling you about the sandbox kind of thing, but it seemed like the early modules were way more, like, I don't know, sincere, or they were like more true to the game than the other ones. Because when you get into like Dark Sun, or you got into Ravenloft, or you got into these other ones that were like their own, or what was the Spelljammer and stuff like that, I was like, I couldn't give It was just it was something completely different. And in that sense, it's like, okay, now the sandbox is whatever we want you to play in. So now it's like Dark Sun, now it's Ravenloft, now it's Spelljammer.
And it was the same company, and they were all competing with each other. The different, It's like, what the fuck?
Yeah, do you guys remember the old Judges Guild modules that were just like on like newsprint? You know, and they'd sell them as cheaply as they possibly could.
All the fanzine newsletters that came out around that time that were just stapled together.
Right. You guys have I still have it in my collection here. City State of the World Emperor by Judges Guild.
You
that was like
have that?
I have it.
Oh shit!
That is uber cool, man.
Oh shit!
I have it. Yes, I still have that to this day. I've got.
Is that one of those roll aids?
Yeah, it was Judges Guild roll aids kind of thing. Yeah,
they were cool.
It is just, and it's just the level. It's a city adventure is what it is, and it's just amazing.
I've got the one with the undead.
But that to me was like, here, build it yourself. You could put that into your own kind of milieu, I guess. And that's really what I never thought of anything different. Like when I was running, I got that too. When I was running back in the day when I was running
age, Rollo.
Yeah. I came in right at the right time. You know, I was the perfect demographic at that time. All those kids in Stranger Things. That was me.
Yeah, you and I are about the same age, aren't we?
I think we're all going to form our own little footpad association, and we're going to burglarize Robert's house because
the Thieves Guild.
There's just too much fucking awesome shit in the background there.
Good luck finding what dimensional portal I have it.
I know, right? You're like a large bag of holding.
Yes.
Well, it was like, so it was at that point where it's like they're introducing or Dragonlance. I think that's where I kind of lost the narrative because I'm like, I want to play in my milieu. I don't want to play in the Dragonlance milieu, right?
Oh, well,
wasn't the Dragonlance novels one of the first novelizations of a D&D world out there?
It was like Tracy Hickman
and Tracy.
Yeah.
And so like when those modules came out, they were cool, and I played them. But then I realized it was part of a bigger kind of like this is the Dragonlance world.
Yeah.
And they almost made you have to play the characters in it,
yes,
or something close to it, because they were all based on the characters that would eventually be in the book. And
as the events in the books transpired, was the second level on top of that. You're playing these characters, and you have to do X, Y, Z, and go through these events.
You have to follow the canon. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's not a game to me. That's not rolling dice. That's not random. No. That's like, what, oh, it looks like Sturm Brightblade died before he should have, or whatever.
Yeah.
So your Judges Guild modules would not have that kind of story attached to it. They would give you, it was like you said, module. It was a module that you could take and plug into your campaign however you wanted. And it didn't have a lot of hard stuff nailed down. There was stuff that was left vague or that was toolkitty that you would then you would flesh it out.
That's what a module means. A module is something that can be inserted in to a larger system and add to or alter its function in some way.
And some of them would include notes inside. Some of the tournament modules would be like, oh. Now this was originally made for a tournament game, but if you were going to put this in a real campaign, you know what you could do? You could add a whole bunch of stuff over here, and you could change this, and this thing that we put in over here, you could make that do this other thing, and then lead to this whole other stuff that you build out yourself. And the assumption was that you would not play it as is. You would just go crazy building a whole world, right? So
Oh, in my original gaming group, we did that with most of the modules that we actually played became a part of our world in some place that it matched the geographic terrain or political climate of the world that we had created. So it doesn't matter that the keep's supposed to be in Greyhawk. It was actually in what would correspond geographically with our world as somewhere in southwestern Ohio or part of Pennsylvania or West Virginia. You'd really have to get on a detailed map, and it was a much smaller kingdom and so on and so forth. And, but my original gaming group wasted hours and hours developing, currency exchanges between the various kingdoms of our world and everything else.
That's part of the fun.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's one of the things that I've always, in retrospect, I had one opinion, and it's changed in looking at first edition again here recently to play with you guys, and that is, I had always thought, well, we spent so much time on this game in our youth because we were young. The only thing competing with our time was whatever jobs we had as kids and school. And obviously school was something that you could sacrifice for the good of the game. And we did. And, now that we're older, you don't do that with 5th edition or 3rd edition or 4th edition because, well, you're a grown ass man and you've got other responsibilities. But in looking back at the game, one of the things it has is it's set up for you to spend hours and days and weeks playing, plotting, planning, doing things even between your gaming sessions that is lacking, starting definitely with 3rd edition, but I think the argument could even be made with 2nd edition. But 3rd edition, 4th edition, 5th edition, they're not set up for you to spend that much time. It's you get together Friday night, you eat your pizza, you drink your Mountain Dews. Aaron Cleary asks where the Cheetos are, and
well, that's around that time is when the computer games started to emerge, and the instantaneous Mountain Magic Missile. That's it. Sort of that took on a life of its own, and I think the book versions, the actual tabletop stuff, had to keep up with this monster that it created, and that meant faster play and more streamlined everything.
Right.
So,
I know they kind of diverged at a point from that style of design. Like at some point around 3rd edition, because 3rd edition is just 3X is just packed full of everything.
Yeah.
So let's take these earlier editions, just keep stacking on top and stacking on top. And let's not worry about whether or not this produces a functional game.
Yeah, 2nd and 3rd are completely, they're at opposite ends.
Right. They just keep packing things on and packing things on. 4th edition was, I understand what people meant nowadays when they say it's not real D&D. I still consider it I don't consider anything post AD&D to be D&D. But 4th edition is the only edition that would have been made regardless of whether or not AD&D had existed. So I think that's what most people mean when they say 4th edition isn't D&D. So I understand that, but that's sort of the only one that went in the taking design lessons from video games. Because 5th edition doesn't do that. There's a few modern tabletop games which will do that, like Lancer takes advantage of it. But otherwise, video games have just shot ahead in terms of design decisions. Far and away from most RPGs, because RPGs had left most of the solutions to the problems they've been having for the past 50 years in AD&D. In that 50 years ago time capsule that's right here. How do we handle time? It's like, dude, I popped 1-to-1 time in a module that I designed for 5th edition. It solves everything I needed it to, because now I get to have a downtime system. Now I get to, and that's what most modern modules are for games like 5th edition, is they're not doing the setting work for the GM so much as they are doing the design work for the brand designers, is what I'm seeing it. Making the distinction between modules and adventure paths. Those are two very different beasts.
James, you want to read this?
More common. 80s D&D cartoon. Did you guys enjoy it or hate it?
When I was a kid, I loved it because it was a chance to. It was as a kid, because it was something to see that was visual, that brought what you loved to life.
I like how weird it was. It's just
it had nothing to do with D&D.
I hated it. Absolutely hated it. I hate it. You know what I love? I love Thundar the Barbarian. But I hate
Thundar,
Thundar. Yeah.
Okay.
Thundar was the first Gamma World for me.
Yeah, pretty much.
Which is another game I absolutely love too.
There was a thread, literally, I think it was last night, by Matt Colville asking people is there a modern Thundar the Barbarian setting where, like, okay, technology advances to a certain point, and then everything collapses, and now it's all magic to these people? I think the only answer that people gave was that matched was Adventure Time. Like, that's the one where you could go into a group of Zoomers, and it's like,
And
okay,
they'll understand you. Yeah.
yeah, it's insanity. There's magic everywhere. Then there's technology mixed in. I guess
absolutely. Well, He-Man was like, I think I was a little too old for He-Man when it first came out. I understand why everybody's like all yah about it, but I was just like, I couldn't get behind He-Man because it was just like toys and cartoons and then, and I was
Orko was the deal breaker.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it probably would have been a great show. I loved Robotech when it came out, and I was really thrilled because that was. And like you want to know like what Jeffro was talking about, you played when you were 10 years old and you had one impression of the game, and then when you're like older and you go back and you watch things that you loved back in the 80s or something, you go, what on earth was I thinking? And I still kind of like Robotech, but
especially the third one, the new generation. The dialogue is just complete shit.
It's just garbage. But I love the animation. I'll still watch. Occasionally watch a Robotech thing. I love Akira. I absolutely love Akira.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, that has aged very, very well. But like as far as like Thundar the Barbarian, I thought it was really great because it was just serious enough that you're like, yeah, okay, I dig this.
Oh, and the heavy metal cartoon.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That's right. I forgot about that. Yep.
And if you're trying to understand Gamma World, you need to watch.
I love Gamma World.
Ralph Bakshi's Wizards.
Oh, Ralph Bakshi's Wizards.
Yeah.
Fritz! They killed Fritz.
That and I enjoyed the Command-E comics back in the 70s by Jack Kirby, which which has the cat people and ape people and everything else. So it was
the map of the comic book world for that setting is just a trip.
Yes, it absolutely is. But I think Alex Toth was the comic artist who was responsible for like character designs and stuff for Thundar the Barbarian, if I remember right. So that was a absolutely great cartoon. That I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the Herculoids and things like that. The Robotech I would have enjoyed more had I seen it first, but I had been lucky enough that I had actually seen episodes of Macross and Genesis Climber Mospeada, which were the first part of Robotech and the last part of Robotech. Southern Cross, I never cared as much for.
Southern Cross was just this thing smashed in the middle. It didn't make much sense. It was there to sell the toys.
Well, yeah. Well, all three series
Jeffro
were
really needed someone to explain to him why Rick Hunter couldn't get with Minmay. I just so hard.
Why would you want to with that fucking voice?
I know.
Oh my god. Christ, just go fuck Lisa Hayes and have done with it. Right? Jesus Christ.
I was at a sci-fi con in probably 86 or 87, and we were showing the Macross movie. The Japanese version, which I think was dubbed as Robotech Clash of the Bionoids or something like that when it was
the Bionoids
released in English. And there's a scene where, this epic war is going on, and Minmay's like telling Rick, let's just run away and escape the war and all this other stuff.
Like the end, it's like the end of Macross,
And Rick Hunter slaps Minmay, and everybody in the room was like cheering. So good stuff. But I'm an old fart like Rollo, so I was too old for He-Man and stuff like that.
I really liked Gamma World quite a bit. I played Traveler for a little while too, and this kind of goes back. My other question for Jeffro is this: why do you hate miniatures? I remember playing Traveler, and the guys I played very briefly. I wasn't like a real big fan of Traveler.
Did you ever have a character die in creation?
Yeah, so
Rolling
yes,
the dice
actually.
too often.
Yeah, it was. It had the level of complexity I think that was really good. And then I played Star Frontiers, which I thought was really
yeah.
good as well.
I want to get a Star Frontiers game going with
I
us
would
too.
love
have
to
all
get
the
it.
originals,
I've
so we
never
can
played
easily
it.
do it.
I'd like
Nice,
to.
yes.
But the best thing about that, I mean, I always like to sort of like branch out into other role playing games. I don't know if any of you guys will remember these. There used to be a role playing game. I still have it in my collection here. It's called Mercenary Spies and Private Eyes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's a badass game. Yes, and then the other one was, and it was a sort of an independently published game, and then it went bigger. I guess it got licensed, but it was called The Fringeworthy. And that was an amazing game. It was Stargate before Stargate was even a twinkle in anyone's eye. It was like you can play multiple genres. It was basically a Stargate. I mean, if you go and you look at the old book,
okay.
I don't think I have it, but it was, you could go into alternate Earths, you could go to sci-fi stuff, you could go back in time, you could go to what if scenarios, like what if Germany had won World War II? Then you could
what kind of system did it use?
I believe it was a D100 kind of thing. It was like a
percentage, yeah, like Star Frontiers.
And then the best thing is it had like you go wherever you wanted to, and it was like the Fringeworthy were like only certain people could go through the portals, right? And you had to be 1 in 100,000 or 1 in whatever it was, and that you were basically you go on the fringes, you go to the Fringeworthy, and you had to, like, the whole thing was you go and you do these adventures, and they didn't really, it was an open sandbox. That's another reason why I liked it. And then the other thing is it had an underlying theme throughout it too. So there were still like critters that were a part of the Fringeworthy kind of universe, but then you could go wherever, you could divert into whatever you wanted to. But the sort of the nemesis, the aliens that were in it would still follow you to those universes and try to like kill you in those universes. And it was a really great game, but you could probably find it on eBay, I think. But again, it's that open universe. And then of course I got into Warhammer 40,000, and it was game over for Rollo at that point, because I got in right at the Rogue Trader era, like right around 1988 or 89, I think is when I got into it. And they didn't even have the box set. It wasn't even like second edition at that point, and everything was wide open. And if you go and you look at the very first edition of Rogue Trader, it was your game, make it up. You don't have the model, build it out of a package, packaging or whatever, like they would encourage you to build your own terrain, build your own models, with the exception of what, the model that they were selling so that you could use them for troops. And it was a scrimmage level game. It wasn't this big, gigantic, apocalypse level stuff. And it was an open sandbox that just ripped off every franchise on planet Earth. And I remember when I was playing this game and I go, man, a lot of this stuff is familiar. Then I realized 90% of Warhammer 40,000, even to this day, was directly pulled from Dune. Everything was pulled from Dune, and just like wantonly so. Like navigators and las guns. That's what got me. I'm like, las cannon, las gun. Where have I heard that before? Oh, and that's what my joke is. This I told Razor Fist this one time because he was trying to like, give me a breakdown of what Warhammer 40,000 is. I go, it's Dune minus the Islam, and take out the Islamic stuff and put Catholicism in there, and you've got Warhammer 40,000.
Yeah.
Like Gothic level, like medieval Catholicism instead of like Islam. That is, if you could do that with Dune, that's what 40K would be. But they were ruthless, man. And they would pull everything from Aliens. They would pull everything from 40K. They would pull stuff from Star Wars. They tried. And it's just, if you go and you play Warhammer 40,000 right now, it's a completely different game than it was back in like 88, 89, even early 90s. IP wise anyways. Now it's going really super woke. So is the Age of Sigmar right now is like super woke as well. They're not like, they don't rub your nose in it like a lot of games do, but it's there. You can smell it. The stink of woke is in the game.
Like 5th edition does. Yes,
definitely.
Yeah, right.
Oh, what was it? Somebody was comparing artwork. Jeffro will love this. Somebody was comparing artwork from like the first Monster Manual, like from back in like 79 or 80, to like what's the one that's like that there's a book called like something's Marvelous Wonders or something like that in fifth edition, and they're
Nolzers or something.
it was that. It was like it was the
Mordenkainen or
Mordenkainen's.
Mordenkainen.
They were doing comparisons to the art in that one versus the art that was like really raw back in like 79, 80, 81. And I'm like, oh man, how far we've fallen, because it's like
Tasha's Cauldron of everything. It was
yes.
picture of the elf barbarian wearing like a Scottish skirt kind of thing, which would have been cool had it not been like the red-nosed tumbler kind of.
Yes, yes. That's why I was laughing at what Jeffro was talking about when it was like get Zeri and get Yankees and stuff like that. They were so raw, like in your face. They're going to shove a dagger right in your
Oh, they didn't care. There was just no fucks given.
It was like the image of the Grell, like that big full page.
Hold that up again, Robert.
In the Fiend folio, where he's
this
like
is from the DM's guide. I can grab
of this thing. Yeah, exactly. You are not going to see that in fifth edition.
Fantastic creatures of myth and legend don't tend to wear a lot of clothes. That's just.
You also
man.
Davy's
Demigods was great.
The snake woman, like they're just not gonna like every edition they get more and more clothes. Like it's like if your D&D book doesn't have one naked woman in it, then it's trash.
It's not.
What was that? What was the? It's not Descent into the Depths of the Earth, but I think it was like the second module of the Queen of the Demon Web Pits or something. If you look on the back of that, and it's the drow guy, and the succubus is there. It's I should go dig it up. I probably have it somewhere.
Yeah, it's completely sexual.
I was like, yeah, I'm buying that.
Yeah,
14 years old.
That's part of that was part of the attraction. Yeah, absolutely. That wasn't that an Errol Otis artwork?
No, that was it's not Trampier. It's who's the D? Jeff. I think it was Jeff D.
We need more Frank Frazetta, less Cal Arts.
Yes.
Frank Frazetta and Boris Vallejo.
Frazetta was good. Boris Vallejo is kind of like a one-trick pony. It's like
he did all the gore
bodybuilder
books.
and paint him again.
he did all the gore books, which I appreciate. So
yeah, my artists were Errol Otis was number one. I met Errol Otis. He actually doesn't live.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, he's a good dude. He's been to. He was at one of the cons here in Reno.
Oh shit! Gotta get him on the show.
Still alive, great dude. He'll do it too. He'll go anywhere.
Let's get him on the show. Fuck.
Yeah.
Oh well, hold those up again, Robert.
Fantastic. That is D&D to me. But then like Trampier, Jeff D, Rosloff is D&D.
Rosloff. He did the cover of the Dungeon board game too.
Yeah. No, it's the second one. It's the second version of those. It's the blue one.
So your paladin got a magic suit of armor.
Yeah. Oh well.
Yeah.
Yeah, but those like the artists were like, especially the early artists, and another person I've met, Errol Otis, Michael Golden, of course, from I guess he would be Bronze Era, Marvel.
Probably, yeah.
And then I have met what's his name? Larry Elmore.
Larry Elmore, yeah.
Larry
He's
Elmore
by your way too.
Yes, he is. Yep. He's around here too. Larry Elmore is like, he still has that. He's that old country boy. He still has his southern accent. I think he's from Texas, Oklahoma, or something like that.
He's from the Midwest somewhere.
Yeah.
He does all the artwork for R.A. Salvatore, and I've met him a few times.
That dude,
he's over here in the Northeast. Yeah,
I've been driving to the
look
airport.
At his stuff, man. Yeah, that was Larry Elmore. He always would get live models, and man, he knew what he was doing. Yeah.
Yes, I've loved this one. My favorite
stories. When we were doing the cover for Appendix N, everybody was saying, like, look, you gotta do Larry Elmore. You gotta make it look like the Red Box.
Awesome cover too. Let's see if I can do this without the reflection.
And I told them, I was like, that's not what I want. That's not.
There you go. That's good.
That's not Appendix N. Appendix N is more Frazetta. It's more Weird Tales.
It's almost. What's his name? Not Caldwell. One of the big five, because there was that sort of those golden years of D&D with the big five: Larry Elmore, Clyde Caldwell,
Parkinson.
Keith Parkinson, which he passed much too early.
Brahm was good too.
Brahm was good too. Yeah, he wasn't one of the big five, but yeah, he was up there. He did a few of the stuff. What was the other ones? Parkinson, Caldwell, Elmore.
Because on the Elmore covers, there's no there was no beautiful woman in danger, which on Weird Tales, like you couldn't skip that, like back in the day. And so I was like, no one in publishing a book with a beautiful woman in danger on the front. They can't do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty sure it's the only book on the market that went that actually pulled that off. And also something's happening, usually with all the modern fantasy, everyone's standing around. Like it's like a group, it's like a selfie or something, right?
Yeah.
It's just, and so it's like you can have the dragon, but like something's got to be happening, So
yeah, it doesn't tell a story, and that's really what illustration is about. I mean, if you go and you look at like Norman Rockwell stuff, it's like you can look. He's an amazing artist, right? I think he's one of the top, like certainly American artists of that time. But everybody looks at him as an illustrator, and the reason is because everything he painted, everything he did it told a story, and you could get what was going on. It was like
it was all for the Saturday evening post
and you knew it was
covers
happening, right?
He conveyed a lot with just
with
a few
little
elements.
bit.
I think that a lot of the early D&D artists did that too. Like you could get an idea of what was going, like a paladin in hell. That was a Norman Rockwell paladin in hell, right? I mean, that was telling that story.
Yeah.
Well, that's
an iconic illustration, pen and ink. Yeah.
Well, that's a problem that's the comic book industry is suffering through right now. The comic book industry is filled with artists. The good ones can draw really nice illustration of a stagnant pose. So you'll have panel after panel of talking heads, then maybe a splash page of action. But the art of telling a story with sequential art, with art that tells the story, even if you don't like Jack Kirby's style, his ability to convey a story with his artwork was readily apparent. And that just does not exist in modern American comic books anymore. At least not in anything that's currently being published, which is sad. And the same is true to a certain degree with the art in most RPG games. There are some pretty art, but it doesn't necessarily grab you. I think one of the only games that's doing modern artwork that has any kind of emotional appeal to me is some of the stuff being done in Europe, in particular for like Das Schwarze Auge. But there again, that's, I have to admit some bias and connection with that. So, I can't necessarily declare myself to be the most credible, but, I definitely think the art there is really, really beautiful stuff. Let's see if I can.
Yeah, this is what I was talking about. It's actually Vault of the Drow.
Yeah,
you can get that. Here it is.
Oh yeah. Oh shit. Yeah, that's good. Yep. There you go.
Yeah, you're 14. You're buying this.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You're gonna read that shit.
Man, thank you, Jeff D. I love you. In 1980 too. But there's so much going on, and it was meant to. Oh, by the way, while I'm on full screen, this is how you know that your sort of nerddom has gone woke. Does the character on the front of the rule book is she female, looks male, but also has that Skrillex?
I can't stand that. That is completely obnoxious.
And I think I think maybe it was Jeffro or somebody else, or no, it was Razorfist who was talking about how the new He-Man is actually new She-Man or Tila. It's all Tila Man. Skrillex Tila is what it's all about.
That was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. If I ever meet Kevin Smith, I'll be the last person to meet him.
He hasn't been relevant. He hasn't been relevant since Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, and even then, I'm pushing it.
Yeah.
So fuck that guy.
I always thought he was a bit overrated, but there again, that's partially a generational thing. My oldest son, who's in his 30s, really likes Kevin Smith.
Well, he was funnier when he was fat and he was actually Silent Bob and didn't say anything.
Yeah.
So, anyway, you guys get into Shadowrun?
I remember
Yes.
that. I remember Shadowrun. I very briefly. That was in the 90s, though, right? That was like
Correct. Yeah,
early
like 91,
90s.
92. Faza put that out when they were ripping off Robotech by doing BattleTech.
Right.
Yep.
So let me ask. I got one more question for Jeff. So what about miniatures? Like, do you think that miniatures have to be used on games? I mean, a theater of mind, or like, what's the utility of miniatures from like a Gygaxian perspective?
Right. Yeah. I think now everybody likes to will pick out different things from Gygax to justify what they do or don't do. But I think this is my reading of the old ancient texts. I think that obviously the guys started out focused on the miniatures gaming, large battles, armies of medieval miniatures, fighting out these things. But for the D&D part, particularly the dungeon crawling, my take is that when you look at the initiative system in AD&D is by side. So the player, the GM will make a plan for the monsters and keep it to himself, and then the players will like talk out what they want to do and make their plan, and then they present it all at once. And then that, for some reason, when people play with miniatures, they really struggle to keep that. As soon as miniatures come out with typical D&D combat scenarios, that people really want to go one at a time. And I'm definitely against individual initiative. I think it ruins the game. I mean, I enjoy GURPS. I like the idea of GURPS where you've got every single sword and parry, sword stroke, parry, and different armor locations for each part of the body and stuff like that. I mean, it's an interesting thing to play with. But for when you're playing D&D, the combat is well, first of all, it's heroic fantasy. It's when you have that really low resolution, like you've got 1 minute combat turns and you're just describing it, and the players have the plans, and then when you're free of miniatures and you're free of complex combat systems, what happens is everything becomes much more vivid, like a comic book or and where you're free to embellish it collectively. And I'm not saying bend the rules or do stuff that's too far out there, but I'm you just those scenes, it really works. But like for a D&D session, I think to really work, you kind of need to cram. It's handy to be able to cram like 3 or 4 combats at least in one session. It's useful to be able to do. It's possible to do that when you don't have miniatures, you don't have everything else, and you keep the initiative by side. The D&D is much more focused towards the strategic than it is the tactical. So the resource management and the planning is the focus of play a lot of times. It really isn't like, hey, how can I move my figure over here to get that 3rd edition attack? What was on the t-shirts? The attack of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Like that to me is just that's a game. It may be a fun game, but it's not D&D.
If we're doing group initiative instead of individual initiative, then would you just have the players go in the order of maybe their marching order,
their dexterity,
or that's the other thing I was going to say, or their dexterity?
No, it's
segments.
My reading of AD&D is that before the initiative dice are rolled, they tell you their plan, and so like this person's going to be like, I'm going to be cowering in the back, or I'm going to be casting the spell. I'm going to charge. All right, I'm going to use my spear behind the shield wall and poke over. I'm going to throw flaming oil. Those all get declared, and then the initiative dice are rolled. Things will happen when they can happen. So if there's a charge happening, then obviously the missile weapons are going to get to go first, and then the charge will happen, and then the spell will go off when the die roll says that the spell goes off. So there's that process of the DM really facilitates all of that to both make it make sense, to make it interact with what the monsters are doing, and what happens when is going to depend on what is it, a melee action, is it a missile, is it magic? All those things happen when they're supposed to happen, not in some kind of like really, really regimented tactical war game kind of a way.
That would make more sense, and it would be, I think, a little bit more dynamic, a little more fluid. And it would probably also minimize analysis paralysis if you don't have everybody looking at, well, how many feet from here to there, what is going to be the...
Right, yeah. The guy at the con who doesn't pay attention unless it's his turn to attack. And then, you know, he's done.
Wow, wait a second. What was going on? Oh, shit. Well, let's see. What could I cast now? Wait a second. Where is everybody?
Yeah.
Flip.
That's actually a pretty good question. Like there is, and I tend to agree with this assessment, but there's a school of thought that it's like, you know, oh, your character would know what to do while you're kind of like dithering, trying to figure out what you want to do, right? Whereas Gygax says, go. And whatever you say is what happens, right? I mean, here's the stopwatch. Go. You have this amount of time. Like, what are you going to do for your 2 actions? And you should really be paying attention so you know what happens during that time, so that when it comes to your turn, you're already prepared to do those 2 actions. Say, okay, I did this. I knock an arrow and I shoot. Right? Bam. That's it. As opposed to, well, I could cast magic missile. Where to go?
I want to cast magic.
Yeah, you could cast or I could cast, or you know, holy flame of whatever, right? And so, but while you're doing that, while you're saying that, the presumption is that's what your character's saying, and that's the end of your round, and moving on to the next one. You know, and you're going to get hit the next time. And so it's like it's that you want to talk about like live time. That's live time. You know what was it? One segment is like 6 seconds. One round is 1 minute.
It used to be a round was a minute, a turn was 10 minutes, and 6 turns was an hour. But I think, I want to say 4. I know it's in 5, but I think it might have started in 4. They made it so that the rounds are 6 seconds, which just seems... I get it. They think that you're taking the action in that time. But as I understand it, the reason that the combat rounds were originally a minute and not 6 seconds is that the assumption was not that it was a single hit. It was that there was an exchange that was taking place over time. And when you're rolling, you are determining whether or not during that exchange a hit would be landed. And I don't know shit about medieval combat, so I don't know how this would actually have played out. But if you are boxing or if you are actually fighting something, sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth, and you might land hits, but you might not like really land something that has an effect. So I'm assuming that it's that sort of a thing. And so, yeah, there's a big difference between a 1 minute round and a 6 second round. I think, like most things, you would just kind of adjust it to the situation. Obviously, if there's a bunch of people that are all crammed up next to each other, some things might happen a little bit more quickly. Whereas if you have larger groups, maybe there's longer things. I don't know. But it was a minute. Now it's 6 seconds.
Yeah.
I suppose you got to figure out what you're going to do ahead of time, though, so that you're consistent with your tracking.
Yeah. Exactly.
With combat being so different, that brings me to a game like RuneQuest. Did any of you guys ever play RuneQuest or have any familiarity with it as a as a game?
I remember RuneQuest. It was. I remember I remember the artwork for it being like a little bit more like visceral than like D&D, and
it was more Conan-like.
I never really played it. It was kind of like Tunnels and Trolls. I knew that existed, but I didn't really play it all that much. Like even Traveler, I played it a few times, but I knew it existed, but I wasn't really part of my genre, I guess.
Okay.
But and then Elf Quest, if you guys remember, like I was
Elf Quest,
Quest with Elf.
Would anyone be surprised if I said I have that right over there?
I don't have Elf Quest, but I used to have Hero Quest. Trying to get a full set right now, they're thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It was just basically D&D Clue with 3D tiles, paraphernalia and shit.
I liked I think, and this is kind of coming to its own. I think there's a lot of I don't want to say dumbing down, but I think streamlining of certain games that they ended up becoming like board games. Like I really liked Dark Tower when it first came out, like in 1980. I'm talking about the one where it's you turn the tower, and you're playing. I see guys that have that play it, still play it. There's a group of guys that play that down at one of the game stores that's down here, and I'm like, holy shit! And then I looked it up on eBay. That game goes for something like $450 for like a good mint quality version of that game. It's like yeah, exactly. And I used to play. I got it for Christmas one time, and I did not realize just how like prolific that game was. And then there's like Hero Quest, or like it eventually became like Advanced Hero Quest or something like that. And that became a very prolific game for Games Workshop. It was Milton Bradley Games Workshop for a while, and now it's like it's coming to its own. Or like Blood Bowl, for example, which was like the fantasy football game. I when I first saw that, I go, God, that is stupid. But like people still, they play leagues. There's tournaments for that game, like you'll see at gaming conventions and stuff now. But I think that there's like this. It went from role playing game to streamlining it to sort of dungeon crawl games, like with the tiles and stuff. I don't know if you guys have ever played Descent. Descent it's like a board game, but it's like a tiles type. It's like a hybrid between like a role-playing game and sort of like a board game, but it's all miniatures. And that's why I was asking that, is because I tend to like using miniatures because I have a wargaming background. But when I'm playing like a role-playing game, especially with you guys, it's like I like to see where everybody's at, so you get an idea what's going on and what people are doing. I know it has that video game appeal when you're doing it over the internet now, but even if I had you guys live, I would still have like a dry erase mat and say, okay, here's where it is, and it would be a little bit rougher, and I would have to rely on like describing the scene to you a little bit more. But I think that when you have that, and you get the tacticalness to it, I think that it's very useful. I mean, even Gygax says, use miniatures, and distances are measured in inches, because that's the wargaming standard. It wasn't 10 feet; it was 1 inch. So I still like using miniatures and models, obviously, because that's just what I like to do. But I think it lends a tactical aspect that people go, oh, okay, the orc is behind me. That's why I don't get to get my shield bonus. That's why I get cold cocked by whatever he's got in his hand, kind of thing. So, and then maybe it's a little bit more bookkeeping. That's another thing I was going to say, Jeffro, is like it seems to me like there's a lot of bookkeeping involved when it comes to things like light and oil consumption and torch consumption and iron rations, and I don't know how meticulous like what would real D&D be. Would be okay, well, you eat 1 potato chip.
I've had callers in the game that like I could run the game, and then they would sort of like help everybody make up the characters and keep track of all their stuff, and that's a big help. Like I when people level, I intend to like go double check their bookkeeping and see have they got the records of their gold spending. Are they keeping up with that? And like honestly, I just never check. Like so it's a real honor system. The encumbrance system for me, like I wish I was as fastidious as other DMs I know that really stay on everybody. Rick Stump, for instance, maintains that if you're really serious about the resource management, that the game really blossoms and things start mattering. Like in my kind of like mediocre level of policing, like I had the players find 10,000 coins. It was 5,000 gold and 5,000 electrum, and I didn't even know how much that was, but one of the players like calculated it out, and it was like, okay, with our strength and probably our gear, right, like they couldn't carry it all out, like that made like we got like I got like 2 adventures out of my one little dumb thing I threw together, right?
It adds an interesting challenge when you include encumbrance, because you have to think about things like this. And we have encountered this in a recent game. There's this treasure, and we're in the dungeon, and we're about 6 miles through wilderness back to the nearest town. And we're thinking, okay, so if we bring it back to the town, where is it going to be secure in this town? Who can we trust in this town? Because there's not really a bank. Should we hide it somewhere? If we hide it, how are we going to mark it so we can come back and retrieve it? We're dealing with all of these problems now related to moving this treasure that we found, that if there was no tracking of encumbrance, we wouldn't have. And it's not boring accounting stuff. It is an interesting problem that requires creative thinking within the game world to address. It creates an interesting challenge for the players. I don't think it's boring accounting stuff. I think it's an essential part of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's D&D right there. And you'll never anticipate the strange things that emerge from just taking it seriously in its own terms. Like it creates gaming material. And of course you see with the more recent editions, like people with 5th edition, I've heard story after story of people, they kill the monsters and they get to this awesome room full of great treasures, and the players like just leave it. Like they want to go fight more monsters after that, because it's not an XP for gold game. Like if there's no good magic item in there, they don't really care about it. So like the whole world.
They're not going to carry shit they don't want.
If they had to pay for training to level up, they would.
Yeah, I love that.
There's nothing you can do with gold in 5th edition. There's no use for it.
You're not saving
my
up to buy a
supplements have been
fortress,
focused on
land, hirelings.
Yeah, all that's gone in 5th edition.
If the characters are not constantly near death and broke and scared and have shortness of resources, are you even having fun?
With the AD&D training rules, like I never had to ask the players, like, what's your motivation? Like, what's your goals as a player? Like, it's so like you. It's hard as heck to get the XP to level to begin with. Like that could take 5 sessions in the way I was running it. But then they'll get there and then they still can't level because they don't have enough gold to pay for the training. It's just, it's so brutal.
And and this is maybe a generational thing. It's definitely a cultural thing, but I don't want a game where I am a superhero that is just tearing my way through goblins like they're wet tissue paper and killing monsters without ever thinking, well, could I die? I want to know that my character is they're risking their life.
It's like playing Warhammer Fantasy.
Yeah, there needs, and the thing is, if you do that, if there's a real, in the game, if there is risk, and if you have to work and think and solve problems and struggle to earn those experience points and to earn the gold and to deal with all the stuff about moving it, to be able to get that level, that is a lot more rewarding. It's a lot more exciting to me than just, there we go. You're level 2, you're level 3, you're level 4, you're level 5.
Yeah.
without having to go through. And if the levels come too fast, I think that's problematic too. And I know so we've kind of skipped ahead to a little bit higher levels for the sake of some of the online games.
Yeah.
Because part of it is also being able to entertain some of the other people and not wanting the characters to be too squishy.
No, there's something to be said for actually striving and struggling from level 1, and that's very true, especially with AD. So that's the problem I have with iterate. I can't speak to 3 and 3.5, but I know 4th and 5th, everything is this equalism. There's no if you looked at the
5th.
If you look at the experience, 4th and 5th is just one experience matrix for everybody.
I love like thieves leveling before everybody else. That's like
Exactly, exactly, and that's you invested that little bit in your character to work that much harder so you could get to that next level. There was a sense of achievement. Now it's just like, all right, everyone gets 2,000 experience points.
Right, you're the paladin. It's going to take or the magic.
Or the monk. The monk took forever. I mean, and then you wanted to get
in Unearthed Arcana, like it takes like a bazillion. Like they don't pay training costs, but they like it takes like an incredible amount of XP to level.
Oh, it takes years in real time. I mean,
imagine
insane.
anything, and if every one of you just pick something that you're really good at, You didn't get really good at it after a couple days of doing it. You've done it for years on a consistent basis to develop the ability to do it as well as you can, the knowledge required to do it as well as you can. It would be laughable for somebody who's starting out at something that you are an expert at to assume that they could do it in a day or two. And while this is simulated, obviously time is not perfectly, although sometimes it's 1-to-1, but in a game, there is a balance. If it's too easy, if there's no challenge, where's the enjoyment? If it's too hard, it becomes frustrating. Obviously, you can't.
Well, you're not having any fun at that point.
It has to be challenging. It can't be too easy. It can't be too hard. Easy, it's boring. Hard, it's frustrating. You've got to find that somewhere in between. And with the 5e, obviously, it's a lot of it depends on the Dungeon Master too and how you run the game. But the way the rules are set up, somebody else, I wish I could credit them. I can't remember who said it. They said that 5e is Fisher Price D&D. It is simplified, and it holds your hand, and it lets it. And the way that I see it, and especially I don't watch very many other live streams for D&D because most of it is just like a bunch of kids playing at drama. It's like a drama club that are trying to do their version of some weird woke Lord of the Rings, and most of it's just a bunch of woke nonsense. It's just terrible. It's terrible. But I think that that's a large part of it too, is that they don't want to be challenged so much as they want to play act. They're role playing, but they're not really playing D&D. They're kind of using it as a framework for this weird story they want to tell together. And oh no, you can't have the character die because, and somebody actually said this in a post somewhere recently, and I told them this is just stupid. Of course characters can die. Why have the rules in the game if you're not?
They've obviously haven't played Call of Cthulhu.
And they're talking about how, it's okay for the DM to fudge rolls sometimes because your character is meant to have this epic story. Well, no, your character is going to have consequences based on the decisions that you make and based on the randomness of the dice rolls. If they die, they die. If you don't have any real risk of dying, if there's no actual challenge, then you haven't accomplished anything. The rules are not really, if you're not following the rules, if you don't have rules, you're not playing a game, you're just sort of play acting out a story, and you're pretending to follow the rules so that you can pretend that you have accomplished something when you really haven't. There's never been any real chance of death. And I mean, with the saving throws, death saving throws, and all the time people have to be able to stabilize somebody and all that, unless the DM is really trying to make it difficult it's hard to die if you follow 5e using the challenge ratings that they give too. Unless, again, even with the like deadly challenge ratings, it seems to be more about play acting than having a challenging adventure.
It's not quite that. Exactly. If you look at the way the structure of the rules is set up, you can go way beyond that. You don't have to follow challenge rating. Nobody in the 5th edition community follows challenge rating. We'll start there. Nobody. Zero. Absolutely zero tables out there follow challenge rating, right? They'll throw a beholder at legacy or at a level 3 party. They don't care. The problem is the way that the structure, and you mentioned this with the inclusion of saving throws, is you have 3 chances basically to roll and stabilize yourself, right? You're not going to get hit points back. But unless if you start taking damage, you'll start failing death saves automatically. If you get crit, which is any melee attack within 5 feet of you, that's 2 failed death saving throws. But it's less effective for the DM to do that instead of just start damaging the other players and hope that he could get the whole party down, right? So that's the structure. That's also 3 rounds worth of however many other players at your table to cast Healing Word or Cure Wounds. And you're as effective at 1 hit point as you are at 0 hit points, which is not terribly effective is the thing. Is that 5th edition does not give you a ton of offensive power. This is the difference between 5th edition, which is the 3.5 retirement home, as I call it, and the other actual real new school games like 4th edition, Pathfinder, 2nd edition, Lancer, is that they don't give you the offensive power. They give you the staying power so that your character can constantly get the crap kicked out of them because they'll just get yo-yoed up and down. The combat will take 6 hours and nothing will actually happen. You'll never be able to do anything cool. You'll never have the offensive power that risks the game-changing power that risks you changing the DM's story or the DM's.
And I think that's a big part of the problem too, is that a lot of DMs, and I even see this because I watch a lot of YouTube channels with, how to be a great dungeon master and all this stuff, and how to be a great game master and all these things. And so much of it is focused on coming up with this story and this big long story arc, and keeping your players on track and all this. Whereas I don't like that approach. The approach that I like, and again, some of this is personal opinion, but I don't like the idea of railroading. I think you create an environment where things are happening, where there are different threats and opportunities, and you set your players loose in it, and you just see what they do. Yeah. And you keep everything that's happening in the background. You have to, or it doesn't seem like it's a real living world. But if you just are trying to tell a story, then you are going to have some ideas about how it ends, and you can't have any idea about how it ends that involves all the players making it to the end without biasing yourself against allowing them to die when the dice say they should, or when they make dumb decisions that would result in their death. And it takes fun away from them. And then again, my personal bias, I don't want to write a story and then guide the players through it. I want to create a bunch of, again, threats and opportunities and see what they do, because it makes it more interesting for me, and also a little bit more of a challenge if I'm running the game, because I've got to kind of be able to react to different things that the players are doing. So that's, I think, another big problem, is so much of the emphasis now seems to be on a story that somebody has planned out, and it biases them against allowing exploration and against letting the characters die when they should. And also, and this is one of the nicer things about AD&D and some of the earlier systems, where you had henchmen and you had hirelings, you had people working for you, is you could have these alternate PCs written up that are just part of your group that's with you. So if you do happen to die, you already have sort of an in-story reason why.
You have a reason for
jump
Joe
to the other
Schmo to become your next character.
Yeah,
And I explained
whereas
that to my new school players when I was designing Lords of Brachus. It's one of these things where, again, you go back 50 years, you go back to this. It's like there's a ton of solutions in here for problems we've been having for 50 years. But then again, there's this other thing where the reason new school games are starting to move into we're going to have high power PCs and we're going to challenge them primarily through asymmetrical challenges, right? Cool, you're really good at killing 20 goblins, but there's an army coming. What do you do? Right? You're not going to fight off an army of goblins. You can fight off 20 pretty well, but we're not going to let you fight an army. You're cursed, you're diseased, and you don't know where the cure is. Those sorts of challenges. And the reason they move in that direction is otherwise there are all of these GMs, especially in the OSR space, not the ProSR space, not Jeffro and I space, and the people who've been selling products and AD&D knockoffs for 50 years, who want to keep the players in their own personal meat grinder and like the old games, not because there's this ton of possibility out there for them to experience, but because they're confident your level 1 character is never going to level. They're always going to die. They're always going to die in this one dungeon. They're never going to escape a demon with gem encrusted tits, right?
Mm-hmm.
With enough gold to level 2 times, as Jeffro was familiar with, right? They're never going to do that in these old school games by and large because they don't want the players to experience the outside world. They also don't want them to explore. So the reason why new school games are moving in the direction of expanding player power is to ensure they have enough staying power, primarily offensive, is where they're going to nowadays, that they can make a dent on the world, right? They're confident I can take this next combat if I'm intelligent or if I don't fuck up horribly. So I am going to move in this. Fuck it. Like, let's go to the space station instead of wherever the GM wants us to go next. And that's sort of where the next conflict is brewing, because otherwise you had these earlier games which people are still playing today. Games like Lion and Dragon, some of the Osric and stuff like that, some of the AD&D knockoffs, where, people just have, they have 6 hit points. I'm confident if they try to go talk to this other guy that I didn't plan on them talking to, because I'm not confident in running a domain-based game, I'll just have an assassin pop out and just kill that guy. And I'll shepherd the players back into my meat grinder dungeon, because that's the only thing I'm competent at running.
Yeah, that just seems lazy.
Yeah.
So what does Jethro think makes a good DM?
Oh man, if you're following the rules and being consistent on it, to the best of your ability, like I know, like AD&D's got a lot of them. There's a lot, it takes a long time to master it, but no, I mean, if you're trying and you put a world in front of the players and you give them free reign to do anything they can imagine, anything that they want, they can go anywhere. That to me, that's the gold standard. If you just do that, I think you'll learn very, very quickly everything you need to know in order to sustain that. It's scary to just go into the deep end on that, but once you start down that path, I guarantee you're going to hear people tell you, "Man, this is the most fun I've ever had playing D&D." Because basically all the other DMs out there are just doing one trick after another to essentially limit their autonomy or to ruin their ability to be able to form effective strategies. Like they just shut that down sort of by fiat, with all their stories and everything else. But when people like engage in a real, when they get that real world that they can just totally do anything in, they have a say in how it develops. That is what D&D is, and that's the game that drove people so crazy in the 70s that they would play it for like multiple days a week even, and have just people coming over to their house at random times to play these 10-hour sessions.
Right.
It's really fun, but for some reason people don't trust it to actually work. I don't know why. Everything that's written about the game is written by people who don't do this. So you read what they write, and then you assume, well, this must be hard or it must be impossible. But no, if you just do what the DMG says, that's really, it's all in there.
Yeah. All right, everyone, we're coming up on the 2.5 hour mark. It's been a very good chat. Well, our chat, the running chat has been a bit of a shit show, but overall, not too bad. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Jeffro, thanks for being here. Thanks for accepting the invitation.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Absolutely love the book.
It's good stuff. Yeah.
Finally got on a show together.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
there you go.
Long time coming.
I lost my train of thought. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping. Robert, where can everyone find you?
Oh, on YouTube, on Twitter, and on Instagram, Robert Kuzland. So just look for me there.
Cool.
And obviously hanging out with the Masculine Geeks. So happy to be an occasional guest. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Jeffro, where can everyone find you if they want to get your D&D wisdom?
Yeah, Johnson Jeffro on Twitter, and then my blog is Jeffro's Space Gaming blog, jeffro.wordpress.com. And yeah, see y'all out in the wild.
Absolutely. James, yourself?
You can find me on AsherCreativity.com and on Twitter as Business AOC, at Business AOC. It's where some of the upcoming projects are going to be posted, and where I will yell at you to open your wallets.
Cool. Open your wallets, you fuckers. TJ.
You can find me at tjmartinell.com.
Cool. Thanks for hanging out with us. I know you were kind of like incognito over there and silent.
I wasn't trying to avoid the conversation. Just a lot of this stuff is I'm not familiar with. If we were talking about fantasy literature outside D&D, I could offer more, but a lot of this stuff was just me listening and kind of being educated because I don't really know as much about this topic.
No, that's cool. And last but not least, Mr. Drew.
You can find me at bay.com. It's BAYE, and at Bay Drew on Twitter.
Excellent. TJ, take us out.
All right, gentlemen, keep the fires burning, keep the lead shooting down range, keep the wine flowing, and don't take any wood nickels, and don't drink all the rum.
That's right.